Sophia said with a worried glance toward upstairs, where Ivy had been taken. And I do love a good game of hide-and-seek, Gemma said, her cheery tone echoing Lady Serena's of a moment earlier. Though, if you don't mind, Gem, could we ladies have a cup of tea before we get started? I think perhaps we can convince Cook to send up some tarts as well. The mention of treats did the trick with the child, and they all retired to the drawing-room for tea and something stronger for those who needed it. Now, some time later, Jem had gone off to hide, while the others set off in separate directions to look for him. As she turned the corner, lost in her thoughts, Daphne caught her breath as she slammed into a hard male chest. "Caught you," said Maitland with a grin as he grasped her by the elbows. But as soon as he saw her face, his smile faded. "What is it, my dear?" he asked, still holding her arms. Unwilling to admit her residual upset, Daphne shook her head. "It's nothing, and may I remind you I'm not the one you're meant to be seeking." When he didn't let her go, she continued, "Let me go, Duke. I'm quite well, and don't need anyone to fuss over me." He let go of her, but didn't step away. He was close enough that she could smell the scent of his shaving lotion and see the glint of lamplight on the blonde stubble of his beard. "Why do I get the feeling you're pretending to be more sanguine about this than you actually are?" His perceptive gaze was narrow, as if he was trying to see into her thoughts. Not for the first time, Daphne was grateful for the fact that mind-reading had never been perfected. She had a difficult enough time dealing with the fallout from her spoken words. If her thoughts were subject to the same sort of scrutiny, she'd find herself in a difficult spot indeed. Since the moment he arrived at Beauchamp House, the handsome Duke had drawn Daphne's interest. Not only because he was a fine specimen of masculine beauty, though he was certainly that, with his broad shoulders, tall build and twinkling blue eyes, but also because of something intangible. It had been there from the moment she'd spied him across the drawing-room. Some spark of attraction between them that was unlike anything she'd ever felt before, and that afternoon she'd almost asked him about it. Daphne was nothing if not plain-spoken, and to her mind the most sensible thing to do about the attraction between them was to talk about it and decide if they wished to pursue it. Of course, her own ideas about what was and was not an appropriate topic of conversation had never been entirely in keeping with what the rest of polite society decreed. Since her arrival at Beauchamp House, Ivy, Sophia, and Gemma had taught her a great deal about what she should and should not say aloud. Her mother had died when she was only 4 years old, and the series of nurses and governesses who had been hired by her father had only lasted a short while before they each gave up in defeat. Only the male tutor, an expert in mathematics, had managed to stay for any length of time, and that was perhaps because he saw her not as a young lady, but as a mathematical genius, a mind to be moulded rather than a prize to be auctioned off in the marriage mart. And so her lessons in gentility had been abandoned in favour of higher maths, which left her with the ability to solve complex equations more quickly than most Oxbridge fellows, and almost no sense of how to speak without setting up the backs of those around her. The walk to the gypsy encampment had seemed like the perfect opportunity to lay her case before the Duke of Maitland. They might be relatively private without fear of being overheard, and there was no danger he'd mistake her words for a marriage proposal, which was the furthest thing from her mind. But despite her determination to speak, Daphne had found that, once the opportunity presented itself, she was reluctant to broach the subject, her usual sang-froid replaced with a rare shyness. So she'd kept to less volatile topics, and had enjoyed herself immensely on the walk. Now, however, she was surprised by just how easily Maitland could see past her mask of calm. "I might still be a bit overset," she admitted, "but I will recover." Looking down to where his hands still grasped her arms, she repeated, "You may let me go." He let go of her, but didn't step back. "Perhaps I haven't regained my balance yet, Lady Daphne." But that was nonsense. "Of course you didn't lose your balance. A man of your size is hardly going to be knocked over by me, tall though I am for a lady." Moving to her side, Maitland slid her arm into his. "You are, of course, correct." She could hear the smile in his voice, and she was relieved he hadn't been annoyed by her correction.